The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters. Greetings and welcome back to the Personal Safety Show. I am Marcus Melnick from Firearm Mentor, your host. Last week we talked about some fun things. We talked about fishing safety, we talked about boating safety and recreational activities. This week's episode is going to be a little bit more serious. We're going to be talking about elder care, elder safety, and what to do for parents and elderly relatives and friends who are aging.
I get to meet a lot of really neat, cool people in my travels, in networking and working in the firearms industry. And today's episode is going to feature two people who have elderly relatives who have memory issues. And it's all about the safety of our aging population. Neither of my parents had memory issues, at least not diagnosed with a dementia type diagnosis, but they did have temporary memory issues. For example, my mother had breast cancer, and the breast cancer had metastasized all over her body, including into her brain, the size of 1 centimeter. So she actually had to have brain surgery. Following the brain surgery, I would visit her. She had a lot of difficulty finding the correct words to use. I think the language center of her brain was affected. Now, ultimately, she relearned, and didn't take a long time, took a couple months, but she relearned the correct vocabulary words, but she would get frustrated. Also, several times she was septic. She had septicemia. That's ultimately what did her in. One time she was recovering from being septic, and we have a friend who's a geriatric social worker. And I didn't know this, but my mom had just talked to her on the phone. My mom's in a hospital bed. And I called her right after and I said, "Do you know where you are?" Because she was insistent that she was in her home. She got agitated with me over the phone. She's like, "Not you too." So the geriatric social worker friend had tried to convince her that she was in the hospital. She was having none of it. So several days went by and she snapped out of it. Fortunately, I called her. I talked to her every day when she was alive, but several days later, I asked her, I was like, "You know where you are?" She's like, "Yes, I know where I am. I'm in the hospital." Cool. She snapped out of it. So I said, "How did you figure out that you were not home?" And she said, "Well, two things happened. First of all, I couldn't figure out where the dogs were. We had two dogs, a chocolate lab named Magnum and a Rottweiler lab collie mix named Nemo." And she said, "I couldn't figure out where my dogs were. And then when they took me down for a test, I figured out I'm not in my home. This does not look like my home." So the people we're going to be talking to today, their parents have a permanent diagnosis of dementia. And although it can be managed, there's a lot of issues. Some of them are safety issues. Some of them are frustration issues that people go through. So this is going to be a 2-episode topic. We're going to be talking to a couple people today who have had aging parents with dementia. And then next week, we're going to be talking about who can help you, who is in the elder community, who can help you if you are in that situation. These are people whom I have interacted with personally. It's not like I said, "Oh, hey, person on the street." So these are people that I know. I hope you enjoy the stories. There is some humor, there's sadness in them, but this is real life. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Coming up, we have Janice Means.
Janice, thank you for taking a few minutes of your time today to talk to our listeners about family members with memory issues. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Can you tell our listeners about your family growing up, siblings, the things you did, your family traditions?
So my immediate family, there are 3 children. I'm the oldest. My mother is the youngest of 8 children. She has nieces and nephews that are older than she is. My father is the middle of 8 children. So I have lots of cousins. Growing up, most of our vacations were about going to Pennsylvania. Now, when we got to Pennsylvania, there would be more traditional sightseeing part of the vacation. But as I got older, my cousins and I that were my age, we were too good to go on those trips. Now I regret it. My parents would go see some cool stuff with aunts and uncles, their brothers and sisters. I really didn't know that a vacation didn't mean you hang out with your family, your extended family. 4 of my mother including my mother's siblings, lived in Illinois. Over the years, it ended up my mother was one of the Thanksgiving houses. That's kind of the gist of what was going on. We spent a lot of time with relatives, lived in the country.
You had a family member who was diagnosed.
I had an aunt and an uncle in my mother's family that were both diagnosed early on. And then I had an uncle that was the next sibling in line after that aunt who lived in Pennsylvania who also had a dementia.
One of the things, Janice, that you were telling me, when somebody has dementia in the family, the rest of the family should know about the signs and symptoms. What were the types of things that your aunt did that you feel you should have known about because some similar things happened with your mother?
In person, she was nice, but you could tell something was wrong because she would eventually repeat you the same questions, tell you the same stories. So there were clues if you weren't around her the other way. But what my cousins didn't share with me until later was her agitation and her arguing and her fighting and her just plain mean at night. As things were developing with my mother, I did text a couple of my cousins and go, was your mom ever mean? Our mom's just mean. And had they told me that before, I think I would have been less stressed to say, okay, this is normal. I need to address them the other way. But a mean turned into mean person. And my mother has a mean streak in her personality, but she also has always been a very loving person. Her gift to me multiple times when I was a young mother, young wife, she would come and clean my house from top to bottom. That was my gift. If you ever had young kids and being a working mother and trying to do that stuff, to me, that was the ultimate gift. Like all my laundry was done. Every floor was cleaned up. You could eat off of it. Everything vacuumed, windows washed, everything. So my mother does have a giving personality, but the mean part of her personality when things aren't going her way has been highlighted in her dementia.
So do you think that the dementia brought that out, or do you think it was her frustration because of the dementia?
I think it's because of the delusional stories that she had. And one of the conversations, a couple of them I've had with my sister, is that we think she dreams stuff and she can't recognize a dream from reality. She insists that one of my nephews lives in her house. My mother used to be very clean and neat. That was one of her deteriorations. She stopped cleaning. She stopped being neat. She stopped taking a shower. She stopped washing her hair. And she used to be dressed to the T. She was an Allstate insurance agent and she was to the T, like looking good. People would go, "That's your mom?" I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "Wow." She insists that my nephew lives at the house. And even when we tell her, "No, nobody lives at your house," she's like, "Nope. Andy lives there and you can't tell me any different." We're like, okay, you can believe that, but it's not true.
You kind of covered health issues with self-care. What type of safety issues were concerning regarding your mother's condition?
The important thing I wanted to point out, I stressed how much my mother did this Thanksgiving dinner that was wonderful. This is how we knew she was definitely something wrong. So she made this Thanksgiving dinner every year, and my mother was an excellent cook, got everything ready, did everything. And while one of us would show up early, two of us show up early to be her go-to gophers, in 2016, she was there for dinner, and then we're all in the kitchen, and my mother had taken the dog out. About 10 minutes later, my mom's not back. And at 15, and we're supposed to eat at 5 o'clock. And my mother always served on the dot at 5 o'clock. She said 5 o'clock. The food was on the table at 5 o'clock. People are coming in the kitchen. "Well, Janice, should I put this in this bowl?" And I'm like, my mother was like, "You had to put the right thing in the right bowl." She had a system. You don't mess with the system. So I'm like, I don't know. They're like, "Can you see her outside with the dog?" Nobody can see her walking the dog. And she never took the dog for a very long walk. We have no idea where she went. She was gone for over a half an hour. By that time, we did start putting stuff into bowls and start getting stuff ready because we knew we would be in trouble if the dinner didn't get on the table at 5 o'clock. That was our, oh my God, she would have never let that happen before. So that was the big clue. Things aren't right. So obviously the showering, the cleaning, taking work. But she also started not eating very well either. And what we think happened, we don't have proof, but we think a couple of times she left the stove on herself and she realized, and it was electric stove because it was out in the country. Electric stove, you can't tell it's on until you set something on it that shouldn't be. And it catches something on fire. So we think she either burned herself or caught something on fire. Because she started, we'd say, well, what did you have for breakfast? I had toast and peanut butter. Well, why didn't you make yourself an egg? Why didn't you cook some bacon? Because we know that's what she likes to eat. She was not feeding herself well. She wouldn't throw things away in her refrigerator, so there would be food there.
Gross,
that was growing stuff. Not the person who used to be able to eat off her kitchen floor.
Can you talk about her being placed and escaping from the facilities?
We had a hard time getting her diagnosed. Her doctor thankfully retired, so she got a new doctor, which made life so much better for all of us. The doctor was used to her combative nature and was like, oh, that's just her, not saying that something's wrong. So she finally got a diagnosis of some dementia. And then in between there was a day that both banks that she banked at in town called. One called my brother and one called my sister and said, your mom's not okay. I think you guys need to check in what she's going on. She thinks people stole her money and, went on and on about the money and stealing it. Both my brother and sister are like, not it. Oh, I get that one, huh? They dealt with her more on some of the other logistical stuff because they live closer to her. So I said, fine, we'll go one bank in the morning and one bank in the afternoon. We'll get dealt with. No money was missing. It was all in her head. The new doctor also was aware and put her on 2 new medications to make sure that helps with memory. Well, when I went to take her to the follow-up, because by that time she would not talk to my sister. She had decided my sister was evil incarnate. So I took her to that appointment and was trying to look at her meds and saying, okay, you got to tell your doctor what meds you're taking. The 2 new medicines that they were nowhere to be found. Obviously, she couldn't take medicines on her own. And so at that point, when I was able to explain that to the doctor, he said, so do you guys need a referral to get her some help? And I was like, yes. You can't place somebody against their will. If they say, I don't need to be placed, you can't place them unless you have a medical professional say there's a problem. And so we finally had the medical professional say there's a problem. I had worked with Eric Klein before, which I think you do know him and know what he does.
Not only do I know him, he's up next.
There you go. I had worked with Eric because my dad's wife had to be emergency placed. She also has memory issues. So I called Eric saying, I know you probably can't work with my mom because in the long term, she'll end up on Medicaid. Like short term, yeah, she can pay for few months, but after a while she's going to have to be put on Medicaid. She just doesn't have the resources to cover that. Which, side note, my sister has learned money issues, money handling can be an early sign of dementia. So Eric said, you're right, I can't really help, but here's the name of 2 places you might want to call in Rockford, and here's the things you need to say. You need to say, can you help somebody get on Medicaid? How many months do they have to be able to pay? Do you help them with the pay now? So he coached me on what to say. And so we found the place for her to be placed. And she had to go with me as an interview at a place in Rockford, went through all the interview, helped pack her stuff, do all that stuff. She actually ran away from there twice. The first day, she just went to McDonald's. She took herself to McDonald's because she likes McDonald's coffee.
I don't blame her.
And then they happened to find her and they brought her back. The next day, she did the same thing. She took off, and this time she went to McDonald's because they stopped at McDonald's and said, yes, she's been here. And then which way did she go? So she was walking and ended up at a store, and the police found her because they put a thing out in the police. They called me and they said, you need to pick your mother up. And I said, I'm sorry, there is no place for her to live because we had already started cleaning out her house. Right. That we knew she shouldn't be able to live in. And they're like, we have no place for her. I don't have a 3rd bedroom. I don't even have an extra bed for her to sleep in. You said you could take her. She needs to stay. By the time the director called me back, my brother and my sister were both there. And I said, all 3 of us were like, we're sorry. You need to figure out how to keep her safe. So we didn't hear anything more than that for a couple of days. In a couple of days, she had broken out the window. Ooh. And crawled out the window, and she had actually ended up at St. Anthony Hospital. She couldn't tell them where she was from. She was
disoriented.
Confused. Yeah. Disoriented, yeah, which is what would happen. So she was at the hospital for a couple of days because they know this woman definitely has some issues that's going on. So we finally got her placed, only temporarily, because of the whole Medicaid thing at a place that wouldn't take Medicaid, but she had enough money to stay there for a few months until they could find a Medicaid opening for her. I visited her several times. Although she complained the most there, I think she actually did the best there overall, but because of the whole Medicaid thing, they eventually had to transfer her. So they transferred her to what was going to be her long-term place. And she was there, the temporary place she was at like 2.5 months. The next place she was there, I think 2 weeks. She kicked the window out of this place as well and had to jump down to get out the window. So she threw her suitcases out the window, had them all packed, and threw them out the window and jumped out, and I guess hurt her ankle. So they caught up with her because she couldn't
slow getaway.
And so then they took her to a geriatric psychiatric unit, and she was probably there for about a month. And what their goal was to regulate her medications so that she would hopefully have fewer delusions, fewer meanness. I don't know how to describe the meanness, but agitated where she had to be aggravated. So she was there about a month. They finally placed her where she's at right now. And it's been about a year. I visit her at this place several times, and she's usually really happy to see people. Whatever they've done with the medication, she has less delusions. On this even keel, the problem that I worry about is one of the antipsychotics they have her on makes her a little bit weak. So she has to use a walker to get around, and where she never had to do that. Obviously, she could jump out windows.
Right. When we talked the other day, you told me that there was a possible firearm in her possession. Can you go into what that was all about?
What we didn't talk about is early on, between the time my brother, sister, and I knew she was misbehaving, because not only was there a bank incident, but there was a letter from the optometrist in town that my mother was banned from going in there because she would go in and make a scene. So we knew she was having some troubles in town that they were like, okay, something's wrong with your mother. It's not right. And she had started calling 911 and sheriff showing up at her house, and she's blaming my brother-in-law and my sister for things. So, of course, the three of us are having a conversation about how she behaving when the sheriff comes up. We're getting the Freedom of Information Act reports and seeing what's going on. And the sheriff has realized that she has dementia and that things are happening. But my brother said, "Where's the gun?" And I'm like, "Wait a minute, what gun?" And he's like, "Whoever this guy that my mom dated way back when gave her a gun." And I'm like, "Oh, where is the gun?" And my sister said, "Well, I think it was in the closet and whatever." And we're like, "Oh my God, freaking out. Where's the gun? Where's the gun?" My brother eventually, a couple of weeks later, said, "I think she sold it," but none of us knew for sure. So that was the biggest fear for us. Is the sheriff going to show up, even though she dialed 911 because she gets so delusional about what's going on? Sheriff comes up, big old burly man knocking at the door and saying, "What do you want?" But she'd go to the door with a gun. She knows how to shoot.
Thank God that she didn't have it in her possession when the dementia started. You used the term the other day, and I'd love for you to explain it. I had not heard the term before, and I looked it up to educate myself. Can you explain what show timing is?
So show timing has become the term that when somebody with dementia, when there's around non-family members or non-immediate family members, that they put on their best behavior and they can act normal. Their best personality comes out during that time. And what seems to happens is they use all their energy and all their focus to make themselves look completely normal, which makes you look like the crazy one that you're saying something's wrong with them. But then they use up all that energy. And so actually after visits, they're usually worse for a while because they've expended all their energy to put that vest on. But my mom was really good at show timing for other relatives and for doctors.
We had started the conversation talking about how there was other people in your family ahead of your mom who had a similar diagnosis. Can you talk about the type of embarrassment that adult children have? And I can't say, well, you can't be embarrassed because people feel the way that they feel. But I don't think that there's any shame in having a family member with memory issues. Can you talk about how the embarrassment is and maybe why your cousins didn't share some of that information with you?
I can't answer for them in particular, but I can tell you how the embarrassment felt for me is why couldn't I provide a better environment for my mother to not experience this so bad, especially when she said things about my relatives, which I finally found out were definitely not true because I found out she was lying about me. Some of the embarrassment was she had called one of my cousins that was her age and accused her of all kinds of crazy stuff. I finally had a conversation with that cousin about it, but she had called my brother because that's whose phone number she had. So my brother told us about the conversation. Well, my mother then calls me and tells me about this cousin and everything that was happening there and I'm like, okay, that can't be true, but okay. It was one of those things of, do you validate what she's saying? Do you argue with what they're saying? And so I just said, oh, that's interesting. Right. I couldn't validate it or deny it, but I didn't want it to expand anymore in her memory. But I can tell you how much the lies happened because there were a couple women that she was really close to, really good friends with. And over time, she didn't talk to them very much anymore. And I couldn't understand. Well, she kept telling me their husbands wouldn't let them talk on the phone to her. And I thought, when the first one happened, I thought, God, that's really weird. But okay, some people have control freak spouses. I don't know. I wasn't there. Well, then the second one happened. Well, then I found out I was one of them whose husbands wouldn't let me talk on the phone.
Interesting.
Well, I knew that was a lie.
Right.
I can talk on the phone all I want. Mike doesn't care. But I finally figured out she called me on a day that we had a grandniece die. She was only 4 months old. She called me in one of her hysterical rants. And Mike, my husband, had just told me that the little girl had died. I was not in the emotional space to handle my mother's drama.
Right.
So I had said to my mom, I can't talk to you right now. Mike just told me so-and-so passed away. I can't talk to you. From then on, she said, Mike won't let me talk on the phone.
You had said, well, I know that's a lie. But to the person, it's not a lie. It's their reality. And yeah. I think everyone needs to understand that. What advice can you give to someone who has a family member who's going through memory care issues? And what final thoughts can you share with families and options that they have to create a fantastic quality of life for those who they love?
One of the biggest is you need to talk to your relatives about what's going on, whether it's brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, those close to the loved one. And if they don't believe you, say, well, why don't you stay overnight with them a day or two? And then you tell me what I should do differently. They need to embrace the reality of what's happening and they need to talk about it. The more I started talking about it or more people started making me talk about it, because I had a couple of relatives who made me talk about it, I found out they've been going through the same thing with somebody else, and there was no shame. They were just more worried because this is their loving relative, and they have no way to talk to her anymore. So share what's going on, and then when it happens to you, there's no surprises like, okay, this is how they dealt with it. I can call this person and ask questions, even if things are different. If you need to place them, by all means, find your Eric Klein, which I know you're going to give his information on a later call.
I will. I actually will.
Find him because he's a lifesaver. Even if he can't actually help you, he might be able to point you to the information you can go on yourself. Remember, everybody's an individual. The things that trigger one memory care person are not what's going to trigger somebody else. The kind of care that somebody needs is going to be different. I've worked with placement of somewhere to keep somebody supported, but I do have a business colleague that both his mother and father together have memory issues. He's had tried to place both of them before and they become so disoriented. They won't eat. They won't go on. He had to move them together somewhere. You got to treat them as individuals. And so he has a different solution because he knew his father wasn't going to eat if his mother wasn't there. So treat them all as individuals. You need to share and talk about it. If you have a relative that's giving you a hard time and says, they don't seem like there's anything wrong, depending on who that relative is, you have to choose whether, okay, I have to ignore that person and let it go, or explain to them in different terms as maybe you need to come see us at 8:00 at night.
Is it usually worse at night?
Oh, yeah, way worse at night. They call that sundowning. As the sun goes down, things get worse. And I don't know that all dementias do that, but what I've experienced myself so far does.
So you want to talk to your mom in the morning, right?
Yes, exactly. So when I go to visit her, I try to make it before lunch.
That's what you have to do. You're going to get the best possible person, not to talk about show timing, but you want to get the best possible person and the best possible interaction you can. And if that happens before lunch, then so be it.
I have another tip. This tip came from a memory care facility when my dad's wife was in there. They said, don't visit your loved one for them. You have to visit them for you because you are now a disruption in their new schedule with their new family.
Well, folks, this is Janice Means talking about family members who have memory issues. And I get to meet a lot of neat people, very interesting people, very kind people. And I met Janice through at least one, maybe several, networking groups. So, Janice, let's pivot a little bit and we'll talk about you. And can you explain to everyone what you do for work?
I have a marketing company called Marketing with JR. I help people with their online presence, so their Google listings, and if they're on social media, making sure their social media is accurate. That's so that when people are looking for somebody in your industry, that you show up with your best possible light. It's great when somebody looks you up and clicks on the link to find you and they get the wrong address, map, pin, or phone number. They can't contact you. So they're going to immediately go to the next person. So I help make sure that information's correct. Once we get all the information correct, I help create a process, whether it's manual or automated, so that they get reviews to the platform where their customers usually look for them. And the reason I worded it that way is I used to say it was 90%, but I just got a new statistic that it's actually 96% of searches are done on Google.
Right.
So that's why you want your Google information accurate as much as possible. But if you're an attorney or a doctor or some other specialized industry, there are different locations where industry-specific data is captured and where more reviews are captured. So if most of your traction comes from Facebook, we're going to funnel your reviews to go onto Facebook. If you're in one of those specialized industries, we're going to want to funnel those reviews to go to the industry pages that are appropriate for that specialty. So that's the second half of what I do for that.
If somebody who's listening has a business, how could they contact you?
My email is my name, Janice, Janice, at marketing-with, WITH-JR.com. The website is marketing-with-JR.com. It'll talk about reviews. If you get to the website, if you dive into there's some other stuff about trade shows. There's a way to contact me through there as well. Phone number is 630-318-6151.
Janice, thank you very much for taking the time to share your story to our listeners. And I'm really hopeful that your story and the other stories that we bring to the radio program are going to help other people. So thank you very much.
You are quite welcome. Thank you.
The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters.